Welcome to the Chapter 24 Flipped Classroom. This flipped classroom will focus on Europe, whereas in the previous flipped classroom we focused on Europe in a global fashion. This flipped classroom will take a look at Europe itself and the changes that were going on there. Now, the first thing that Europe was going through is identified by this map. There are actually two things identified here. The first you can see from this key. If we were to look at a map of Europe, let's say in 1300, we could safely guess that 99.9% of it, if not 100% of it, would be covered by one type of religion, Christianity. And this map shows that Europe is still Christian. However, the Protestant Reformation has occurred. This is one huge source of turbulence for Europe during this time period. There is all of a sudden division between these different branches of Christianity. And the ones that we are going to learn about are Anglican, Calvinist, and Lutheran. We'll also learn about the Catholic Counter-Reformation. Eastern Orthodox, we're not going to worry about so much. This chapter is known as a gold mine and a minefield because it is very rich in information, but sometimes it's easy to get lost in the particulars and not focus on the big picture. So without further ado, here are the 4 things to focus on, big picture, in this chapter. First of all, profound changes began to take over Europe in the 16th century in Christianity. Christianity had served as the main unifier in Europe after the collapse of the Roman Empire, and it was permanently fragmented by the Protestant Reformation. This age also witnessed strong centralized states. This is the second thing that can be identified in this map. You see the states forming of Spain, France, the Holy Roman Empire, which will become Germany, an exception to the rule, England, Russia over here, etc. So we see some power transferring from local hands, it's in feudalism, to strong centralized hands. There's also some economic changes going on that are leading to capitalism that ensure competition between these states, which leads to a lot of wars. But there are also changes in social structure. Because of capitalism, or the dawning of capitalism, which we will learn about in the next unit, we see the rise of merchants. And we also see a lower status for the landed elites, so people with titles. And lastly, Europeans start to have smaller but healthier families, which leads to a big population boom. It's a little counterintuitive. The bottom line is that 1450 to 1750 is an incredibly disruptive time, but it also is a time of strengthening for Europe as well. It's important to remember that this time is in conjuncture with and is happening at the same time as all of the things that we learned about in chapter 23. The first thing we're going to be studying is the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation is a highly problematic thing for Europe because, again, the Reformation was something that challenged the glue that held Europe together. To be sure, the Catholic Church had a lot of issues. First of all, they were fairly corrupt. As we saw in Cathedral, the video, they had a lot of corruption within their ranks, and a lot of people were driven by wealth. There was also a lot of immorality. For example, many of the popes actually had kids during the time of the Renaissance, which, as you know, popes are supposed to be abstinent. And these popes went so far as to claim these children on their wills. There was also the issue of absenteeism. And people felt like the church really wasn't present in their own lives. So into this mix, into these problems, we bring Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a German monk who was appalled by the hypocrisy and the immorality of the Roman Catholic Church. Particularly, he attacked the selling of something known as indulgences. Indulgences were sold to people to lessen their time in purgatory. So they were sold to you for your sins, and you could even buy them after you died. Your family could buy them in your stead. The church made a ton of money on these indulgences. And this is a big issue for Martin Luther. In fact, St. Peter's Basilica in Rome was built off of these indulgences. And there was a surge of indulgences to fund that cathedral, or to fund that basilica. Martin Luther, in 1517, attacked the church with his 95 Theses in Germany, kind of on the periphery of the Catholic Church. And this was aided immeasurably by the printing press. The printing press which was a new invention, allowed Martin Luther's paper to become a huge problem. What would have been local became widespread. While Luther proposed specific reforms, such as closing monasteries and translating the Bible, his most radical stance was his refusal to recognize papal authority. To Luther, the only true source of Christian religious authority rested in the Bible. And that's what he thought people should get their words from. He took issue with things like the church's authority in terms of confession of sins. He took issue with masses in Latin. He wanted them to be in English. But originally, Martin Luther didn't set out to create a new religion, although he did. Others besides Luther, outside of Germany, took very different approaches. For example, the English Reformation was much more political than religious, with Henry VIII wanting to not only seize land from the church, the land held by the church was about 70% of the land in England, but also looking for a divorce from his Catholic wife. She was allied with Spain, and so he knew there was a very small chance he was ever going to get that divorce. So instead, he created the Anglican Church. And if we go back to our map, we can see that that is, again, mainly in Europe. Or excuse me, mainly in England. We also have John Calvin, and what John Calvin, who was a French lawyer, what sets him apart is his belief in predestination. He was even more radical in terms of, which predestination means that God knows when you are born whether you're going to heaven or hell, and it really undermines or is conflicting with the concept of free will. John Calvin also believed that people should have much, much more authority in the church, and he believed that the people who were predestined to go to heaven were separated from society. They were known as the elect. Especially in French, many elites started to join this religion. He wrote a book called The Institutes of Christian Religion that summarized and organized early Protestant thought. Here we have Martin Luther, Henry VIII, and John Calvin. Calvinism became what today is Presbyterianism. Now, the Catholic Church did react to this, but it would be a mistake to view the Catholic efforts at reform as nothing more than a reaction to Luther and Calvin. The Catholic Counter-Reformation, however, was slow and halting into the middle years of the 16th century, so basically they were spurred on by the Reformation. The Council of Trent, which lasted from 1545 to 1563, both redressed specific abuses and reaffirmed Catholic theology. So, for example, it lessened indulgences, the sale of indulgences. Another interesting thing is that the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits, were started at this Council of Trent. These guys became hugely important in the New World. Here's the council here. The Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits, was started by St. Ignatius Loyola. Loyola University is a Jesuit university, as is St. John's in Minnesota. They basically supplied the missionaries who were sent to India, China, Japan, and the Americas, so basically all around the world. The Jesuits also stressed education, and hence the founding of many universities. Now, the Protestant Reformation was way more than just a religious reformation. It had repercussions in all walks of life. The growing tension between Catholics and Protestants manifested itself, first of all, in witch hunts. Many common people experienced the Protestant Reformation this way. It was their interpretation of the chaos. Especially where there were many, many Protestants and many, many Catholics, that's where the witch hunts were the strongest. Over 60,000 suspected witches, mainly women, mainly single, lost their lives. There were also many wars that resulted from this. So we'll first talk about the Spanish Armada, this one down here, where the Spanish sent a group of ships to England, to Protestant England, to try to attack it. However, there was a Protestant wind. Basically, the ships were destroyed at sea, and it was an epic failure. Another example of this is the French Wars of Religion from 1562 to 98 between the Catholics and the Calvinists. And last but not least, you've got the 30 Years' War, which was fought throughout Europe, but most specifically in the Holy Roman Empire. And this is the most deadly war in Europe by percentage until World War II, by percentage of the population lost. The ending of this religious war was the Peace of Westphalia, and we'll talk about that in a moment. In the end, neither side was wholly victorious, and compromises of varying religion, political, and geographic natures were forced. So here is Europe after the Peace of Westphalia. This establishes stronger borders and also makes it clear that nations, or excuse me, countries are sovereign. So you can't just attack a country just because you want to. That's the main thing that comes out of the Peace of Westphalia.